He was a cop who believed his badge was a shield protecting him from consequence. A veteran officer who saw the world in black and white and judged it accordingly. On one fateful morning in the supposed sanctuary of a courtroom, he unleashed his contempt on a black woman he deemed beneath him. He grabbed her, shoved her, and sneered, confident he was untouchable. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had no idea that the woman he had just assaulted wasn't just another citizen. She was the one person who could shatter his world with a single signature because she was about to become his new boss. This is the story of how one act of hate led to an unthinkable reckoning. A story of hard karma served ice cold. Officer Kevin Brooks adjusted the tactical belt slung low on his hips. The familiar weight of his Glock, his taser, and his cuffs gave him a comforting pressure. This uniform had been his skin, and Elmwood County had been his kingdom. From the driver's seat of his patrol car, he watched the world through tinted, shatterproof glass. A world he felt was slowly, irrevocably slipping away from the one he knew. The morning was already thick with humidity, the kind that made his polyester uniform stick to his back. He had just finished a coffee at the Daily Grind, where the owner, a grizzled old-timer named Hank, always had a complaint ready. Today it was about the new housing developments on the south side. "They're packing them in like sardines, Kevin," Hank had grumbled, wiping the counter with a damp rag. "Changes the whole character of the town." Brooks knew what character meant. He had seen it himself. More brown faces, more languages he didn't understand being spoken at the grocery store, more calls to neighborhoods that used to be quiet cul-de-sacs filled with manicured lawns. He wasn't a racist, he told himself. He was a realist. He just believed in order. And to him, order looked a lot like the Elmwood County of his youth. His partner, Tony Marino, a younger Italian-American guy who worshipped Brooks, was scrolling through his phone in the passenger seat. "Hey, did you see the latest polls for the sheriff's race? Harlan's lead is shrinking," Brooks grunted, pulling away from the curb. "Polls are garbage. Sheriff Harlan is a lock." He knows how to let his deputies do their job without burying them in paperwork and sensitivity nonsense. The sensitivity nonsense was a direct jab at Harlan's challenger, Denise Powell. She was an outsider, a former prosecutor from the city with a platform built on community policing, transparency, and reform. To Brooks, these were just code words for coddling criminals and handcuffing cops. He had seen her campaign signs. A smiling professional black woman with a sharp suit and a gaze that he found unnervingly confident. She represented everything he resented. Powell is all about that defund the police garbage, even if she doesn't say it. Brooks continued, his voice a low growl. "You let someone like her in charge, and we'll be filling out a use of force report every time we draw our sidearms. It's a joke." "Yeah, a real joke," Marino echoed, though his agreement lacked Brooks's venom. Their radio crackled to life, a call for a bailiff assist at the county courthouse. A disturbance in courtroom 3B, Brooks smirked. Probably some deadbeat fighting a parking ticket. Let's go babysit. As he navigated the familiar streets, Brooks's mind drifted back to the election. Sheriff Harlan was old school. He ran the department with a firm handshake and a clear understanding that his deputies formed a thin blue line, and as long as they kept the peace, he would have their backs, no questions asked. Brooks had a few incidents in his file, a misunderstanding with a Latino teenager that led to a formal complaint, an aggressive takedown during a protest that was caught on a bystander's phone. But Harlan had made them all disappear. He was a protector of his own. The thought of a woman, a black woman from the city sitting in Harlan's chair made his stomach turn. She wouldn't understand the realities of the street. She wouldn't understand the split-second decisions they had to make. She would see a cop like him as the problem, not the solution. He pulled into the courthouse parking lot, swinging the cruiser into a reserved spot with practiced ease. The building was a familiar monolith of beige brick and imposing columns, a place where the scales of justice were meant to be balanced. But in Brooks's experience, you could always put a thumb on the scale if you knew how. "All right, let's see what fresh nonsense we've got today," he said, slamming the car door. He walked with a swagger, his shoulders back, his hand resting casually on his belt. He was Officer Kevin Brooks, a senior patrolman, a gatekeeper in his kingdom. And inside that courtroom, someone was about to learn just how little their own voice mattered when he was the one keeping the order. Courtroom 3B was a small, stuffy chamber, reserved for traffic violations and minor civil disputes. The air was stale, smelling of old paper and cheap disinfectant. Judge Whitaker, a man whose patience had worn as thin as his graying hair, was presiding over the morning's docket with an air of weary resignation. When Brooks and Marino entered, they saw the source of the disturbance. A black woman stood before the judge's bench, her posture erect, and her voice calm but firm. She was dressed not in street clothes, but in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that spoke of professionalism. Her hair was styled in neat, intricate braids that fell just past her shoulders. This was Denise Powell, though Brooks didn't recognize her from the campaign signs. To him, she was just another problem. "Your Honor, with all due respect," she was saying, "the citation states I was in a commercial loading zone, but the curb was not painted yellow, and there was no signage indicating any restriction. The city ordinance is very clear on this." Judge Whitaker sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ma'am, the officer's notes say the sign was clearly visible." "Then the officer's notes are incorrect," she replied without a hint of wavering. "I have photographs on my phone, time-stamped, showing the exact condition of the curb and the lack of signage. If the court would allow me to present them," the bailiff, an older man named Wilson, stepped forward. "Ma'am, the judge has a very long docket. Perhaps you should just pay the fine." This was where Brooks decided to intervene. He saw a woman challenging authority, questioning the word of a fellow officer. It was a scenario that pushed all his buttons. He strode forward, his boots making heavy, deliberate sounds on the linoleum floor. "Is there a problem here, Your Honor?" Brooks asked, his voice booming in the quiet room. He didn't look at the judge. He stared directly at Powell. Judge Whitaker looked relieved to pass the buck. "Officer Brooks, thank you. This woman is refusing to accept the citation. I am not refusing." Powell corrected him, turning to face Brooks. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and held no fear. "I am contesting it based on evidence. That is my right." Brooks got a sick sort of pleasure from moments like this. He saw her confidence not as poise, but as arrogance. He saw her articulate defense as talking back. "Your right is to show respect in this courtroom." Brooks sneered, stepping closer until he was invading her personal space. The officer wrote the ticket. "You pay the ticket. It's simple. We don't have time for your little games." Powell didn't flinch. "This isn't a game, officer. It's the law, and I'd expect an officer of the law to have a better grasp of it." The comment struck a nerve. It was a direct challenge to his authority, his intelligence, and his uniform. Tony Marino shifted his weight nervously by the door, but Brooks's blood was starting to pound in his ears. The world narrowed to just him and this woman. "You've got a real mouth on you. You know that," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing low. "Maybe you need to learn how things work here in Elmwood." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of her suit and the flesh beneath. It was a move meant to intimidate, to physically assert his dominance. Powell's eyes widened. not in fear, but in shock and outrage. "Get your hand off of me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or what?" Brooks challenged, yanking her arm slightly. "You going to file a complaint? It'll end up in the same trash can as your photos." That was when she tried to pull her arm away. It was a natural reaction, a reflexive attempt to reclaim her own body. But to Brooks, it was resistance. It was assault. In his mind, she had crossed the line. "That's it," he snarled. "You're done." He shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a violent, two-handed thrust that sent her stumbling backward. She tripped over a spectator's foot and fell hard, her shoulder hitting the corner of a wooden bench with a sickening crack. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Judge Whitaker shot to his feet. "Officer Brooks, what in God's name are you doing?" Powell lay on the ground for a moment. The wind was knocked out of her. Pain flared in her shoulder, sharp and white-hot. But worse than the physical pain was the humiliation. The utter violation of being physically attacked in a court of law by a man sworn to uphold it. She pushed herself up, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. There were no tears, no hysterics. Just an icy calm that was far more terrifying than any scream. She looked from Brooks' smug, sneering face to the shocked judge, and then to the other people in the room, her gaze cataloging every detail. "Bailiff," the judge stammered, his face pale. "Help her up. Officer Brooks." That was completely uncalled for. Brooks stood his ground, defiant. She was becoming aggressive. "Your Honor, I de-escalated the situation." "De-escalated," Powell said, her voice dripping with scorn as the bailiff helped her to her feet. She brushed off her suit, her movement stiff from the pain in her shoulder. "You assaulted me." "Case dismissed," Judge Whitaker said hurriedly, banging his gavel. "The ticket is voided. Ma'am, you are free to go. Officer, a word in my chambers now." Brooks shot her a look of pure hatred, a silent promise that this wasn't over. But as Powell walked out of that courtroom, holding her injured shoulder, she made a silent promise of her own. He was right. This was far from over. He had just declared war, completely oblivious to the fact that she was the one with the arsenal. He had no idea who Denise Powell truly was, but he was about to find out. Kevin Brooks left Judge Whitaker's chambers fuming. The old judge had given him a verbal slap on the wrist, muttering about optics and unnecessary force. But Brooks knew nothing would come of it. He'd write a report framing it as dealing with a combative individual, and Sheriff Harlan would sign off on it without a second glance. The system worked. Back in the patrol car, Marino was uncharacteristically quiet. "What's eating you, Tony?" Brooks asked, turning the ignition with more force than necessary. "I don't know, Kevin," Marino said, avoiding eye contact. "That was a lot back there. You shoving her like that." "She was asking for it," Brooks snapped. "You saw her running her mouth to the judge, challenging my authority. You give them an inch, they take a mile. You got to put them in their place right from the start. It's called proactive policing." Marino just nodded, looking out the window. "Yeah, I guess." Brooks spent the rest of the day stewing. The woman's calm, defiant face was burned into his memory. He hated that she hadn't cried or screamed. It felt like he had lost. Even though he had been the one to put his hands on her, he consoled himself with the knowledge that he would never see her again. She was just another face. Another problem solved the Elmwood way. The election soon followed. Brooks didn't pay much attention to the final days of the campaign, so sure was he of the outcome. He cast his vote for Harlan and went about his business confident that the protective shield of the good old boys network would remain firmly in place. The day the final results were certified, The entire department was called to an urgent all-hands meeting in the main briefing room at the sheriff's headquarters. The mood was tense. Rumors had been swirling all morning. Brooks took a seat near the back with Marino, laughing and joking, projecting an air of unconcern. Sheriff Harlan walked to the podium at the front of the room. He looked older than his years, his face saggy and defeated. The usual bluster was gone. "All right, settle down," he began, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "As many of you know, this was a tough election. We fought hard, but the final absentee ballots have been counted and, well, the results are in." He took a deep breath. "Soon, Elmwood County will have a new sheriff. I want to thank all of you for your years of service and dedication. It's been the honor of my life." A stunned silence fell over the room. Brooks felt his stomach drop. It wasn't possible. Harlan couldn't have lost. Who would protect them now? Who would understand them? Harlan gestured toward the door. "And now it is my professional duty to introduce you to the sheriff-elect for Elmwood County, Denise Powell." The name hit Brooks like a physical blow. Powell. It couldn't be. The door opened and she walked in. It was her, the woman from the courtroom. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit, her expression poised and unreadable. Her shoulder, he noticed, was no longer held stiffly. She moved with a fluid grace that commanded attention. She walked to the podium and stood beside the defeated Sheriff Harlan. She was no longer just a combative individual or a mouthy woman. She was the most powerful law enforcement officer in the entire county. She was his new boss. Brooks felt the blood drain from his face. The room started to spin. Marino, sitting beside him, audibly gasped. "No way. Kevin, is that?" Brooks couldn't breathe. He stared at her, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes swept across the room and seemed to lock directly onto his. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of triumph, just a calm, steady gaze that was somehow more terrifying than any open threat. It was the look of a person who held all the cards and was patiently waiting for the perfect moment to play them. He remembered his own words echoing in his mind with horrifying clarity. "You're going to file a complaint. It'll end up in the same trash can as your photos." His complaint file wasn't going into the trash. It was going to land on her desk. The deputies around him began a smattering of polite, obligatory applause. Brooks's hands remained frozen in his lap. His kingdom had not just fallen. It had been conquered by the very person he had tried to humiliate. The shield he had relied on for his career had just been shattered, and he was standing completely exposed before his new and deeply wronged sheriff. The karma wasn't just coming for him. It had already arrived and was sitting in the corner office. Early in Sheriff Denise Powell's tenure was a masterclass in quiet systemic revolution. There was no grand speech about revenge, no immediate purge of the old guard. Instead, she began with procedure. Her first department-wide email announced 3 immediate policy changes. First, every sworn deputy, without exception, would be required to wear and activate a body camera for every single public interaction. The cameras were to be turned on before exiting the patrol vehicle and not turned off until the incident was fully concluded. Second, a new use of force review board was being established. It would not be comprised solely of senior officers, but would include a rotating civilian member and a deputy elected by their peers. Every single use of force incident, from an arm grab to a firearm discharge, would be automatically reviewed. Third, mandatory monthly training sessions were being scheduled focusing on de-escalation techniques, cultural competency, and constitutional law. The first session was titled Citizens' Rights During a Law Enforcement Encounter. To Kevin Brooks, each new policy was a dagger aimed directly at his heart. "This is a goddamn witch hunt," he fumed to Marino in the locker room. "Body cams for every interaction. You know how much paperwork that is. And a civilian on the review board. What the hell does some pencil pusher from the PTA know about street policing?" Marino was trying to be optimistic, or at least pragmatic. "Look, Kevin, maybe it's just stuff she has to do. Campaign promises. It'll blow over. We just keep our heads down, do the job." "Keep our heads down," Brooks scoffed, slamming his locker shut. "She's trying to turn us into social workers with guns. This isn't policing. It's pandering." Brooks watched her every move, searching for a sign that she recognized him, that she was coming for him. But she gave nothing away. She walked the halls with a calm authority, greeting deputies by name. She had clearly memorized the entire roster and was holding meetings with division heads. She promoted a sharp young Latina deputy, Rosa Delgado, to sergeant, a move that sent ripples through the department. Delgado was known for her by-the-book approach and her fluency in Spanish skills the old administration had largely ignored. The atmosphere in the department shifted. The older deputies, Brooks' crowd, grew sullen and resentful. They spoke in hushed tones in the break room, referring to the new sheriff as Queen Denise or the prosecutor. They deliberately mishandled the new body cam tech, forgetting to turn it on or claiming technical malfunctions. Meanwhile, a younger faction, including the newly promoted Sergeant Delgado, seemed energized. They saw the changes as long overdue modernizations, a chance to build trust with a community that was often wary of them. The department was fracturing along invisible lines. One afternoon, Brooks was writing a report at his desk when Sheriff Powell walked through the bullpen. She was making a point of being visible, of learning the day-to-day operations. As she passed his desk, she paused. Brooks's heart hammered against his ribs. This is it. "Officer Brooks," she said, her voice even and professional. He stood up slowly. "Sheriff." She looked at the report on his screen. "How long have you been with the department?" "For a long time, ma'am." He managed to say the word ma'am, tasting like ash in his mouth. "For a long time," she repeated in a thoughtful, almost clinical tone in her voice. "You've seen a lot of changes in Elmwood County in that time, I imagine. Was this a trap? A test?" "Yes, Sheriff, a lot of changes." "Good," she said, giving a slight nod. "Then you'll be able to adapt to a few more." And with that, she walked away, leaving Brooks standing there, trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. She hadn't mentioned the court. She hadn't mentioned him grabbing her, shoving her. It was worse than an open accusation. She was letting him stew. She was dismantling the system that had protected him, piece by piece. And she was forcing him to watch. He wasn't just a target. He was a spectator at his own execution. The new regime wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a complete shift in the balance of power. And he was on the wrong side of the scales. Sheriff Denise Powell was a prosecutor by training, and she approached her new role with a prosecutor's meticulous patience. She knew she couldn't fire Officer Brooks for the courtroom assault alone. He would claim it was a personal vendetta, file a wrongful termination lawsuit with the powerful police union, and potentially win. He had to be dismantled by his own history brick by brick. The courtroom incident wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. It was the probable cause she needed to start digging. Her first official act, unseen by the rank and file, was to request the full unedited security footage and the official court transcript from courtroom 3B on the day of her assault. She watched the silent, grainy video in her office late one night. She saw Brooks' aggressive posture, saw him invade her space, saw his hand clamp down on her arm. She saw the shove clear as day and her own body hitting the bench. The transcript recorded Judge Whitaker's panicked words and Brooks's audacious lie. She was becoming aggressive. I de-escalated the situation. This was Exhibit A. Next, she accessed the department's internal affairs database. Under Sheriff Harlan, the system was a joke. Complaints were often marked unfounded or exonerated with minimal investigation. She searched for Brooks, Kevin. The list was longer than she expected. There were many complaints over his career, a number that high should have been a massive red flag. But under the old regime, it was a sign of a proactive cop. She began to read a complaint from some time ago by Mr. and Mrs. Mendoza. They alleged Brooks and his partner Marino had pulled them over for a broken taillight, which they claimed was working perfectly. Brooks then claimed he smelled marijuana, a common pretext, and conducted a search of their car without consent or a warrant. He found nothing, but he left their belongings strewn on the roadside and issued them a citation for the taillight. Anyway, the complaint was dismissed after Brooks and Marino wrote a supplemental report, stating Mr. Mendoza was verbally aggressive. She pulled the dispatch logs and the vehicle maintenance records for the Mendoza's car. The logs showed Marino had run their license plate before they were pulled over, suggesting it wasn't a random traffic stop. An inquiry to the DM5 cross-referenced with the car's last inspection showed no record of a faulty taillight. This was Exhibit B. Another complaint from years earlier was from a young black man, Darius Cole, who was arrested for resisting arrest after being stopped for fitting the description of a burglary suspect. The suspect was described as a black male 6'2". Darius Cole was 5'8". The charges were eventually dropped, but not before he spent a weekend in jail. Brooks's report painted Cole as a violent thug who fought him like a cornered animal. There was no body cam footage, of course. The department didn't have them then. The complaint was marked exonerated. Sheriff Powell sent a quiet request to the county records office. She wanted to see if Darius Cole had filed any other complaints or had any other interactions with law enforcement. She discovered he had moved out of the county sometime after the incident. He had no prior record and no record since. He was a ghost. She hired a private investigator, using her own money to find him. This was Exhibit C in progress. She worked methodically, creating a file, a thick, detailed, undeniable portfolio of one man's abuse of power. She cross-referenced his reports with dispatch logs, witness statements that were initially ignored, and even property room records. She discovered a pattern. The targets were almost always people of color. The justifications were almost always flimsy pretexts. The narrative in his reports was always the same. The citizen was aggressive, disrespectful, non-compliant, and Officer Brooks was the calm, professional peacekeeper who was forced to escalate. The security footage from the courtroom proved that his narrative was a lie. If he would lie so brazenly about an incident with dozens of witnesses and a judge present, what had he done on a dark road with only a terrified family as his audience? One evening, Sergeant Delgado knocked on her office door. "Sheriff, you wanted to see me? Come in, Rosa." "Close the door." Powell gestured for Delgado to sit. She trusted the young sergeant's integrity. "I'm conducting a sensitive internal review of past conduct," Powell began carefully. "It involves patterns of questionable stops and searches by certain veteran officers. I need someone I can trust to discreetly interview a few individuals who filed complaints in the past. Complaints that were insufficiently investigated." Delgado understood immediately. She didn't need to be told who the target was. Everyone knew Brooks was a problem. "I understand, Sheriff. Who do you want me to talk to first?" "The Mendozas," Powell said, sliding a thin file across the desk. "I want to know exactly what happened that night on Route 17. Every single detail." The investigation was now active. While Brooks was out on patrol, grumbling about his new body camera and the woke policies destroying his department, his entire career was being exhumed, autopsied, and prepared for display. Sheriff Powell wasn't just building a case for termination. She was building a case for the soul of her department. The summons came via a sterile departmental email. Officer Kevin Brooks is required to attend a meeting with Sheriff Powell in her office at the appointed time. Your union representative may be present. Brooks's blood ran cold. This was it. For some time he had lived under a cloud of dread, and now the storm was about to break. He immediately called his union rep, a bulldog of a man named Ray Donnelly, who assured him it was probably just a procedural review. But Brooks knew better. At the appointed time, Brooks and Donnelly walked into the sheriff's office. The room was immaculate, the large oak desk clear except for a single thick manila folder placed perfectly in the center. Sheriff Denise Powell sat behind the desk, her expression as calm and unyielding as it had been in the courtroom. Sergeant Rosa Delgado stood silently by the window, a notepad in her hand. "Thank you for coming, Officer Brooks." "Mr. Donnelly," Powell began, her voice devoid of emotion. "Please have a seat." They sat. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Powell opened the folder. "Officer Brooks, this meeting is to discuss a pattern of conduct that is unbecoming of a deputy of the Elmwood County Sheriff's Department." Donnelly immediately jumped in. "Sheriff, if this is about a specific incident, my client has the right to be informed of the charges against him." "Oh, it's about several specific incidents," Powell replied smoothly, not taking her eyes off Brooks. "Let's start with a recent one. An incident in courtroom 3B a while back." She slid a glossy 8x10 photograph across the desk. It was a still from the security camera footage. It showed Brooks, his face twisted in a snarl, with his hands on her shoving her backward. "You stated in your report that you de-escalated a situation with a combative individual. Does this image," she tapped the photo, "look like de-escalation to you, Officer Brooks?" Brooks stared at the photo, speechless. Donnelly began to bluster about context and the stress of the job, but Powell held up a hand to stop him. "Let's move on," she said, pulling out another document. "This is a complaint from Mr. and Mrs. Mendoza. You reported pulling them over for a broken taillight. Strange, then, that the state inspection shortly before and a dealership check shortly after both found the light to be in perfect working order. You also stated you searched their vehicle after smelling marijuana. Mrs. Mendoza is a severe asthmatic with a lifelong allergy to cannabis smoke. Sergeant Delgado took a new statement from them recently. They describe a terrifying ordeal where you and Officer Marino illegally searched their car and humiliated them." She looked at Brooks. "Were you aware, officer, that lying on an official police report is a felony in this state?" Brooks's face was pale, slick with sweat. He looked at Donnelly, but his union rep was now silent, his usual bravado gone. "And then there's Darius Cole," Powell continued, her voice like ice. "Arrested by you for fitting the description of a suspect who was 6 inches taller than him. You claimed he violently resisted. My investigator located Mr. Cole in a neighboring state. He's a third-grade teacher. He was so traumatized by his interaction with you that his family moved away. He describes you slamming him against your patrol car for asking why he'd been stopped. He has photographs of the bruises. He is now willing to testify." She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. The courtroom, the Mendozas, Mr. Cole. This is the pattern. An abuse of authority disproportionately aimed at minority citizens, followed by falsified reports to cover your tracks. For his entire career, you haven't been an officer of the law. You've been a bully with a badge protected by a system that refused to hold you accountable. She closed the folder. The sound was like a gavel falling, That system is gone, Officer Brooks. Finally, Brooks found his voice. A strangled, desperate sound. This is because of the courtroom. This is revenge. You're just doing this because of what happened to me. What you did to me in that courtroom was the final symptom of a disease you've carried for your entire career. Powell corrected him, her voice rising with cold fury for the first time. You assaulted a citizen. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. To you, I was just a black woman who needed to be put in her place. What you failed to understand is that I was in my place. A citizen in a court of law exercising my rights. And you, officer, were the one who was out of line. She stood up. Kevin Brooks, as of this moment, you are terminated from the Elmwood County Sheriff's Department effective immediately. Sergeant Delgado will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings, after which she will retrieve your badge, your service weapon, and your credentials. Donnelly started to protest. You can't just... Oh, I can. Powell cut him off. And I have. Furthermore, this entire file, including the evidence of your falsified reports, is being forwarded to the district attorney's office. Your career in law enforcement is over. The only question that remains is whether your future will involve a jail cell. The hard karma had hit. It wasn't just the loss of his job. It was the public stripping of his identity, the annihilation of his pension, the looming threat of criminal charges. He was no longer the king of Elmwood County. He was a disgraced civilian, exposed and powerless. As Sergeant Delgado stood and said, "This way, Mr. Brooks," he looked at the woman behind the desk, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just his boss. She was his reckoning. The termination of Officer Kevin Brooks sent a seismic shockwave through the Elmwood County Sheriff's Department. It was a public execution of the old way of doing things. The news spread like wildfire, first through the department, then through the local news. The district attorney's office, under public pressure and armed with the airtight file Sheriff Powell had provided, announced it was opening a criminal investigation into Brooks for perjury and official misconduct. Tony Marino, Brooks' former partner, was offered a deal to testify truthfully about the Mendoza stop and other incidents he had witnessed, and he would face a suspension and retraining instead of termination and potential charges himself. After agonizing over it, Marino took the deal. The betrayal was the final nail in Brooks's coffin, severing the last thread of the thin blue line that he thought would always protect him. In the time that followed, the department underwent a painful but necessary transformation. A few of Brooks's staunchest allies, seeing the writing on the wall, opted for early retirement. Others who had been on the fence began to grudgingly adopt the new policies, their body cameras suddenly working perfectly on every call. The resistance didn't vanish overnight, but its figurehead had been decapitated. Sheriff Powell didn't gloat. She focused on the future. She held town hall meetings standing before the same communities Brooks had terrorized, and she listened. She answered tough questions about the department's past and laid out her vision for its future. She launched a new community outreach program with deputies, including the now contrite Marino, partnering with local leaders. Sergeant Rosa Delgado became a key part of the new leadership team heading up the new training initiatives. The sessions weren't about blame. They were about improvement. They trained in realistic, scenario-based de-escalation, learning to use their words before their weapons. One afternoon, Sheriff Powell was walking through the main bullpen. The atmosphere was different. It was still a cop shop, but the sullen resentment was being replaced by a cautious, professional energy. Young deputies were talking about community policing initiatives, not complaining about paperwork. She paused by the empty space where Kevin Brooks' desk used to be. A new recruit, a young woman fresh from the academy, now sat there diligently typing up a report. The recruit looked up, saw the sheriff, and smiled. "Afternoon, Sheriff." "Afternoon, Deputy," Powell replied with a warm nod. As she walked back to her office, she thought about the courtroom. The sting of the humiliation had long since faded, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The karma that had found Kevin Brooks wasn't mystical or magical. It was structural. It was the result of one person gaining the power to hold another accountable. She hadn't set out for revenge, but for reform. In cleansing the department of a man like Brooks, she had created the space for a better kind of policing to grow. The fight was far from over. The culture of an entire institution couldn't be changed overnight. But looking out her office window at the streets of Elmwood County, Sheriff Denise Powell knew a crucial battle had been won. The seeds of change had been planted, watered by accountability and nourished by the simple, powerful idea that no one, not even a cop with a long career, is above the law. Kevin Brooks's fall from grace was not a quiet disappearance. In the digital age, disgrace often finds a second life as a rallying cry. Stripped of his badge and pension, facing a drawn-out legal battle, Brooks refused to fade away. He reinvented himself. With a cheap microphone and a webcam, he launched a podcast from his garage called The Real Thin Blue Line, painting himself as a martyr, a victim of the woke agenda, and a radical anti-cop sheriff. "They're not just coming for me," he'd rasp into the microphone to his audience, a small but fervent collection of online trolls and disgruntled ex-cops. "They're coming for every cop who believes in law and order. Sheriff Powell didn't fire me for what I did. She fired me for what I represent, a strong America where criminals are scared of the police." His narrative, however twisted, found an audience. It became a thorn in Denise Powell's side, a constant source of misinformation that fueled the simmering resentment within her own department. The police union, led by the perpetually combative Ray Donnelly, saw Brooks's online crusade as a useful weapon. They couldn't defend his actions, but they could attack the woman who held him accountable. The union began a campaign of 1,000 cuts. Frivolous grievances were filed for every minor policy change. They contested shift schedules, uniform updates, and the wording on new departmental forms. When Powell tried to secure county funding for a state-of-the-art de-escalation training simulator, Donnelly and the union lobbied the county commissioners hard, framing it as an expensive video game and a waste of taxpayer money that should be going to more guns and more cars. One morning, Sheriff Powell found flyers in the department break room. They showed a caricature of her opening the doors of a jail with the headline, "Elmwood's New Turnstile Justice." "Are you safer?" She knew this was the next phase of the battle. Firing Brooks was like pulling a single deeply rooted weed, but the soil itself was still contaminated with years of the poison he and others like him had spread. Her biggest challenge wasn't just managing the criminals on the street. It was managing the ghosts of the old guard within her own walls. The pressure was immense. She saw the exhaustion in Sergeant Delgado's eyes and heard the wavering confidence in the voices of her other reform-minded deputies. The constant internal resistance was demoralizing. During one particularly grueling command staff meeting, her chief deputy, a veteran named Matthews who had cautiously supported her changes, laid it out bare. "Sheriff, the union is killing us," Matthews said, his voice heavy. "They're telling the rank and file that you don't have their backs, that you'll throw them to the wolves for a minor mistake to appease the public. Morale is in the gutter. Cops are afraid to be proactive because they think you'll put them under a microscope." Powell leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "My microscope is for the Kevin Brookses of this department, not for good cops doing a tough job. The problem is, for too long, this department refused to see a difference between the two. The union is fighting to protect their power, not their members. They want to return to the days when a cop could assault a woman in a courtroom and call it de-escalation. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. They think they can wear me down. What they don't understand is that I've spent my entire career fighting systems more powerful and more entrenched than their little union. We are not going back. We will get the funding for that simulator. We will continue the training. We will prove that our way isn't anti-cop. It's simply better policing. She was drawing a line in the sand. The ghost of Kevin Brooks was still haunting the halls, his whispers of dissent amplified by the union. But Denise Powell was not afraid of ghosts. She was preparing to turn on the lights. The ultimate test of Sheriff Denise Powell's new philosophy came on a cold, rainy day. A day when the sky hung low and gray, weeping a miserable drizzle onto the county. The call crackled over the radio with a specific chilling tenor that made every cop listening feel a jolt of ice in their veins. A man was on the outer girder of the old steel truss bridge over the Elmwood River, threatening to jump, and he was holding his 7-year-old daughter. The man was Eric Finch, a name known to dispatchers from a handful of prior wellness checks, a recently laid-off mechanic with a history of severe depression and anxiety. His wife, unable to cope any longer, had packed her bags and left that morning. It was the final fracture in a life already riddled with cracks. In his dusty garage, surrounded by tools he no longer used, Kevin Brooks watched the live news helicopter feed on a large monitor. The familiar adrenaline surged through him. He got his union rep, Ray Donnelly, on the phone. "You see this, Ray? This is it. This is where the rubber meets the road." Brooks spat, his voice gleeful. Her little talk-it-out policies are about to meet reality. He's got a kid. That changes everything. You don't de-escalate that. You end it. The initial response on the scene was chaotic, a textbook example of the old ways. 2 patrol cars had screamed up to the bridge entrance, sirens blaring. A rookie deputy was already on a bullhorn, his amplified voice, a distorted, aggressive plea of, "Step away from the edge. Put the child down." Eric Finch predictably only grew more agitated, screaming back at them and clutching his terrified daughter, Sophie, even tighter. When Sheriff Powell's car slid to a halt a quarter-mile away, she took one look at the scene, and her face hardened. She keyed her radio, her voice cutting through the panic with surgical precision. "All units, kill your sirens. I want that bullhorn silenced now. Establish a half-mile silent perimeter. No one approaches the bridge. I want Sergeant Delgado at the forward command post, and get SWAT leader and Dr. Reynolds from County Mental Health here immediately." As she strode toward the cluster of vehicles, she could already feel the resistance. The SWAT commander was itching for a green light. Donnelly was there, a vulture in a cheap suit, whispering to other deputies. "See, she's freezing up." No command presence. Powell ignored them. All her focus entirely on Sergeant Rosa Delgado, who was studying the bridge through binoculars. "Report, Sergeant. He's in a highly paranoid state." "Sheriff," Delgado said, not lowering the binoculars. "The sirens, the bullhorn, it's everything his file says we shouldn't do. He sees us as the enemy. His wife took his medication when she left. He's running on pure adrenaline and fear. His daughter is the only thing he thinks he has left. If we try to take her, he'll take them both over the edge." "What's your recommendation?" Powell asked, though she already knew the answer. "Let me go out there," Delgado said, finally turning to face her boss. There was no bravado in her eyes, only a profound seriousness. No weapon, no tactical vest. He needs to see a person, not a uniform. The training we did, the crisis intervention, The active listening, it was made for this exact moment. I can connect with him. The SWAT commander scoffed. Sheriff, that's suicide. He could throw her at the sergeant. He could charge her. We need a tactical solution. A sniper could neutralize the threat. You will not neutralize a sick man holding his daughter, Powell snapped, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. The commander fell silent. She turned back to Delgado. What do you need? Just time, Delgado replied, and for everyone else to stay back. Powell nodded, then faced the small crowd of officers. Sergeant Delgado is primary on this scene. Everyone else supports her. Is that understood? She stared directly at the SWAT commander and Ray Donnelly until they both reluctantly nodded. As Delgado stripped off her vest and unholstered her weapon, Brooks was ranting into his phone. She's sending in a lamb to the slaughter. This is insanity. The protocol is to create a distraction. Rush him from two sides. Secure the asset, the girl. He's a threat. You neutralize the threat. Unaware of the commentary from the ghost of the department's past, Delgado began her slow, solitary walk onto the bridge. The cold rain soaked her hair and dripped from her nose. The steel girder was slick beneath her boots. She could see the wild terror in Eric's eyes and the smaller frozen terror in his daughter's. She stopped 50 feet away, holding her empty hands up. It's cold out here, Eric, she said, her voice calm and steady, unamplified. My hands are freezing. I bet Sophie's are too. Stay back, he screamed, his voice against the wind. You're not taking her. Okay, I'll stay right here, Delgado promised. I'm not here to take anyone. My name is Rosa. I'm a mom. I just want to make sure you're both okay. She spoke about her own son, about a time he was scared of the dark. She didn't offer solutions or make demands. She just talked, a human voice against the desolate backdrop of the river below. Slowly, Eric's screaming subsided into ragged breaths. I've lost everything. He finally choked out. My job, my wife, Sophie is all I have. I'm a failure. Losing a job doesn't make you a failure, Eric, Delgado said softly. And your wife leaving doesn't make you a failure. It just means you're in pain. I can hear that. And I'm sorry for your pain. This was the moment. The validation, the empathy, the thing no bullhorn could ever communicate. But you haven't lost Sophie, she continued, taking a careful step closer. Look at her. You've held her tight this whole time, keeping her warm, keeping her from falling. Even now in all this pain, you're still protecting her. You're still her dad. You are still her hero. Let me help you bring her hero home safely. The word hero broke him. A deep, guttural sob tore from Eric's chest. His body sagged, the fight going out of him. He sank to his knees on the narrow beam, carefully setting his daughter down on the steel in front of him. Sophie, freed immediately, scrambled toward Delgado, burying her face in the sergeant's legs. The crisis was over. The body cam footage was raw, harrowing, and ultimately triumphant. Sheriff Powell released the entire unedited video to the media. The county watched, mesmerized as the scene played out. Not with a hail of bullets, but with a bridge of conversation. The story became a national sensation. Sergeant Delgado was hailed as a hero, a face of compassionate, intelligent policing. At the next county commissioners' meeting, the vote to fund the new training simulator wasn't even a debate. It was a celebration. The motion passed unanimously to a standing ovation from the public. Ray Donnelly sat in the back row, his face grim, his stack of protest flyers now utterly useless. In his garage, Kevin Brooks watched the news report, his podcast forgotten. He saw the saved child, the lauded sergeant, the triumphant sheriff. He saw a world of policing that had not just fired him, but had rendered him and his entire brutal philosophy completely and utterly obsolete. He clicked off the monitor, and the triumphant images were replaced by his own reflection in the dark screen. A bitter, irrelevant man alone in the gloom. A ghost finally and completely exorcised. The story of Officer Brooks and Sheriff Powell isn't just about a single act of racism or a satisfying moment of karma. It's a powerful reminder that true justice requires more than just hope. It requires accountability. It shows how systems that protect abusers can be dismantled from the inside by determined and principled leadership. Brooks believed his badge made him invincible. But he forgot that the power it represents is borrowed from the very people he swore to serve, and that power can be taken away. In the end, the story of Kevin Brooks and Sheriff Denise Powell leaves us with one profound, unforgettable truth. No matter how powerful you think you are, no one is above the law. And the seeds we plant through our actions will eventually bloom, whether they bear the sweet fruit of justice or the bitter harvest of consequence. Brooks believed his badge granted him immunity, that his uniform made him untouchable, that the old boys network would forever shield him from accountability. Yet, in a single moment of unchecked arrogance and prejudice, he unknowingly handed his future to the very woman he tried to break. What followed wasn't loud revenge or dramatic punishment. It was something far more powerful. Quiet, methodical justice that dismantled an entire system of abuse, one honest step at a time. This tale reminds us that real strength isn't found in dominance or fear, but in integrity, patience, and the courage to stand for what's right even when the system seems stacked against you. It teaches us that karma doesn't always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it walks in wearing a sharp suit, carrying a thick folder, and speaking with calm authority. Most importantly, it shows that true change begins when good people refuse to stay silent and choose instead to rebuild with compassion, accountability, and respect for every human being. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep inside about fairness, power, and the kind of world we want to live in, drop a comment below and tell me. What lesson hit you the hardest? Which part of Brooks' downfall felt most satisfying to you? And what do you think Sheriff Powell should focus on next in her fight for better policing? Your thoughts matter. If you believe in stories that inspire real reflection and positive change, please hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel while turning on notifications so you never miss the next powerful tale of justice served cold. Thank you for watching. Together we keep these important conversations alive.